Hi, welcome to CBTS Tech Talk. Today is Inside the CISO's Office, Episode 3. I'm your host and moderator, Lance Hart. Today, I'm joined by experts John Bruggeman, Consulting CISO, and Justin Hall, Director of Security Services, as well as our special guest, Sandy Kapoor, CTO at various financial institutions. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Lance. Hey, folks. Welcome back to Episode 3. Here with my good buddy, John, our consulting CISO. And looking forward to talking to our special guest today, Sandy Kapoor, Sandy, why don't you introduce yourself to the crowd?
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm so glad to be here. CBTS has been a great partner for me through various of my professional life. Worked with Jack Schwartz and this team, so it's an honor to be here. So until recently, I was the CTO at Mizuho Securities. It's the third largest Japanese bank in the US. We're 3,500 people and mostly doing wholesale banking. Investment banking. In Japan, we're a retail firm as well. So my mandate was in the US and focused in those businesses. Yep. And yeah, prior to that, I was CTO at Caspian and CTO at another firm as well. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, man. And it's certainly been great working with you and your organizations over the years. I know, you specifically haven't just contained yourself to security. And so that was one of the exciting things I wanted to, learn from you today and talk about was the way that you, have worked certainly in the security space, but have had, other responsibilities in your purview. So, we've got some great topics to cover. John, you want to start us off?
Sure. One of the things, Sandy, that I think people would be very interested in, particularly since you're representing a financial, or your most recent past is in the financial space. How do you prioritize risk and the threats that you were most concerned about in your environment? What was your strategy for that?
Yeah, that's a good question, John. So the first thing we needed to think about is like, what business are we in and what are our most important assets? That's the starting point. Like, you can't really prioritize unless you know who are we, so I think that's the first question. Every IT group and every executive team has to first understand, hey, we're in the business of X, and in that business, what are our most important assets? So in investment banking, one of the three most important assets, at least in my experience, was in dealing with protecting your data around deals. In finance, there's this concept of MNPI, material non-public information, which is one of those things that your teams and various investment banking teams are working on. And this is very, very sensitive information. So how do you protect that? It can't get out. There are regulatory requirements around that. And there are penalties associated, both reputationally and in terms of fines when you're not guarding that data well. So that would be one aspect. The other aspect of our business that was important to protect was, if you're in the program trading business, you write algorithms. You have to protect your source code. So that's another area, another vector, or another set of assets you have to protect. And last but not least is your business operation. And that's really, really broad. And what is business operation? It's everything every firm has to do, your email systems, your perimeter, and all of that. So you look at these three sets of assets, and then you say, all right, what is the likelihood of any one of these things getting threatened from an operational standpoint and from a data leakage standpoint? Okay, and your regulatory obligations. So based on that is what you do to prioritize. So in my universe, once we decided, all right, these were the three domains that were important to us, how do we protect it? And in each domain, you could wind up with 3 or 4 major initiatives at any given point in time to protect it or to get better. And you also have initiatives that could be very, very long. Like as an example, when it comes to protecting deals, you have to worry about who's allowed to see that deal, who's allowed to access that deal, who's allowed to even be in the same room as the people working on that deal. So the protection for one domain is different from the other. But some of these projects, so we had to implement data classification to protect deals, right? Because you wanted to say these documents are sensitive. And if they're sensitive, only these types of people are allowed to access it. And these other documents are not. So data classification for a mid-sized company, 4,000 people, is a lot of work and very difficult to implement. It can take a year. It took us about a year to get through all of that. And you can't just sit on that one project. So that's when you start thinking about prioritizing and getting small wins. So while you're working on this big, difficult project, you can worry about the third domain, because the third domain is the general business operations domain. And for that, you could have many, many small wins. You could say, hey, you know what? We only have 2 layers of email protection. Should we be adding a third? Is it a 2-month project? Is it a 3-month project? If it is a 2-month project, let's get some small wins. Those small wins help motivate your team, because if you're doing your reporting well and you're doing your KPIs well, you're actually telling your constituents, hey, we're accomplishing things, we're getting better. Makes your team feel good, makes you feel good, gives you a chance to build camaraderie with your team. And with every small win, you go out for a drink and you celebrate it. So it's just building a good culture through those small wins while you're working on the big initiative.
Yeah. So in terms of those, you've got deal information, intellectual property, or the algorithms that you used in trading, and you had business disruption, which some people wouldn't understand. That's kind of like code for ransomware type of attacks. And you could get wins in the business disruption category pretty quickly. Was there any particular, tools or methods that you found most helpful for that?
Yeah, in the business disruption side, it goes back to one of the basic principles of security, right? Defense in depth, right? So apparently one of the largest vectors for attacks is email. So that's one area you really have to focus on, and it's all about building layers. So it's not just one tool. So for us, we use different strategies for email. So at the endpoint, we said we needed to have a minimum of 2 approaches to deal with malware. Right. So what does that mean? It means we wanted to have signature-based solution and we wanted to have a behavior-based solution. So all our endpoints had to have 2. The third one was whitelisting. Whitelisting would have been a third one. So, but the policy and our standard was you have to have 2 types of solutions at the endpoint. The other standard we tried to adopt was whatever your solution was at one area, you had to implement a different technology and a different platform in the other area. So back to emails, at the endpoint, we had 2 of them, and we chose, I forget whether it was Symantec or, it was CrowdStrike in some instances. But in our email gateway, we use something else. So this way, if one vendor missed a signature or missed a certain type of attack, you would have a different layer. So fundamentally, all these small wins in business operations, we had laid out the foundation for practicing good layered security with different sets of tools.
Right, because one of those things about layering security is you want to have overlapping, overlaps. So like you said, if let's say it was Symantec missed a particular signature, but your email gateway caught it, then you weren't vulnerable. You did prevent that risk, that threat from coming in.
I wanted to jump back really quick to something you said a minute ago, Sandy, around the different areas of focus. I like your 3 kind of big domains and how you classified. They're distinct. Each one requires a different strategy. Do you feel like the folks in your organization, the lay people, for lack of a better term, right, the non-technical security folks, would they be aware of the sensitivity of that information? Did you have to do a lot of work to, reinforce that idea, to communicate to your sort of broader, workforce, hey, this deal information is sensitive, it's private, you shouldn't share it. You have to be really careful about protecting our code, our algorithms, that type of thing? Or was that inherent and folks just kind of get that because of the nature of the work? How much work did you guys have to do there?
I would say we had a very intense, long security program. And part of that was because we went through a number of mergers, different cultures, different tooling. I would say the most difficult project out of all these many initiatives was data classification, because it transcended your disciplines. It applied to everyone in the organization. It applied to the legal department because they manage a lot of sensitive data. It applied to our investment bankers because it applied to much of what they did. But it also applied to IT. You know, our network diagrams, our passwords, those are very sensitive. So from the time length standpoint, it was the longest. From the cultural education standpoint, it was also the most difficult. It required lots of training, because as part of data classification, you end up at a minimum deploying at least 3 different tools. You need tooling in your email system, so when someone decides they want to send something sensitive, they can tag it if they're not part of the default group that tags documents automatically. So for investment banking, pretty much everything you create, every document you create is tagged as sensitive. But in IT, it's not. But every now and then, if you have to send an email with some sensitive documentation, you need tooling to tag that. So it required multiple tools. You needed a tool there. You needed a scanning tool that every night would go through all your documentation and made sure if it found PII data, it tagged that. If it found sensitive confidential information based on certain rules, it would tag that. So that would be the second set of tools. And then you need another tool at your perimeter, in your firewalls, in your proxies, in your CASB, to detect those tags and say, wait a minute, this person's not allowed to send data to this place. So it's a long-winded answer, but it was very difficult. It required lots of training and lots of agile practices. You know, we didn't deploy it throughout the organization. One big bang. We deployed it to the most sensitive areas first. So legal, we had a great legal team that was very willing to work with IT and help us with the kinks. We had a great investment banking team, and they were worked very closely with us. So, you know, as you gain momentum and as you publish these KPIs that tell you, hey, we're succeeding in this domain, in this group, you build momentum and in the culture and in the organization to get that to that end state where everyone in the organization is using those sets of technologies and accustomed to a new way of doing work.
Yeah.
You've mentioned KPI, key performance indicators, and I know there's KRI, key risk indicators. Do you have a more valuable KPI or KRI that you've found useful over the years?
Yes, thank you, John. That's a good question. It's always a struggle because getting data and using that as insight is not easy, right? And building KPIs and building that consensus even among your team to help you come up with meaningful data is an interesting exercise and iterative. You don't get there right away. So on the operational side, some of the interesting KPIs for me were how long it takes to provision someone. So every now and then I would say, you know what, in the last 6 months, how many traders have we hired, or how many IT folks have we hired? And these is their portfolio of tools or access they need. How long does it take to provision someone, soup to nuts? You know, in a well-functioning organization, for me, my target was 3 days at the maximum, right? And for me, it's also an indicator of if you're managing your internal clients and servicing your internal clients well, it's a reflection of what you're going to do with your external clients. So it was very important to have these operational type goals. You know, initially it took us like sometimes a week or 2 weeks to hit those provisioning targets. We managed to reduce it to 3 days. We had about 200 different platforms in our environment. Some of them could be SSO integrated, and a lot of them were not. You know, and we had many business partners where you had to send emails and get people to create accounts. So provisioning was an important metric for me. The other important metric was password resets. It sounds like it's such a small little thing in the whole scheme of things, but it tells me, you know, how well are we utilizing IT, right? Some sometimes you have self-service portals for some applications, but for some applications you don't. So how much time are you really spending doing password resets? And how do you then look at those statistics and say, all right, you know what, these 4 applications, we really need to migrate it to SSO. So those 2 would be some interesting operational metrics, KPIs that I used. On the security side, my favorite metric is the number of actionable incidents versus total incidents. And what do I mean by that? Let's give you an example. Let's say I have 20 incidents for that month. And we go through what we called false positives. So that would be the first filter. The things that we know were just absolutely false positives. The second would be something we called anomalous but safe. Okay, which is, hey, this person logged in 3-4 times. Why is that? It requires an investigation, but we determined, it shouldn't have happened, but it's safe. It could be for some service account that was trying to log in again and again because it failed at this first time. And then what you wind up with is, all right, you've eliminated your false positives, you've eliminated your anomalous but safe. Now you have the incidents that require investigation. Right. So if that ratio, your number of actionable incidents versus total incidents, if that ratio is going higher and higher, it means you're doing a great job tuning your alerts. And that for me is important, because what that means is we're eliminating a lot of things we don't need to investigate, which means when something happens, we can action it right away. We can focus on areas of risk.
So that gives us, 2 things that, folks can sort of take away, the key performance indicator and the key risk indicator. And have you found that metrics are more valuable or as valuable as regulations in terms of what you would focus on or what you want your team to focus on? Or do you balance the 2, like metrics and regulations?
I think in terms of managing your team, one of the most important tenets I found to help your team become sustainable is to break out the resources for people doing operational things and people working on projects. And if you do that, you help many you help in many ways, right? So the first is the focus. When people are not interrupted with day-to-day activities and they're doing more project-based work, they tend to focus more, and vice versa. The operational people focus there, they'll realize there's some inefficient process, they'll work to improve it, right? Because everyone wants to make their life easier for the most part, and for the most part, in our profession, people are very motivated to improve things, and so you get that momentum of allowing people to focus and build things. So to answer your question about regulations versus other KPIs and other areas, regulations are things you really have to work on, because usually there's a deadline tied to it. So you have to have resources. And if you don't want to miss your deadlines and you want to execute well, you better not let them get lots and lots of interrupts. So I tended not to worry too much about regulations, because as long as I resourced it well and I had the right budget, those tended to get done. The hard part was, once those projects got done, you wanted to make sure it got done well, so it wouldn't become an operational burden once you finish the project. And so for me, to be honest, most of my focus was on operational. My favorite buzzword, I had 2 favorite buzzwords. One was operational excellence. Okay, so for operational excellence, you need operational visibility. So if you don't have operational visibility, it's going to be very hard to do operational excellence.
Sure.
So after you're done with that regulatory project, you come to the operational world, the operationalizing. That's when you really need visibility. You need to get better and better, because you're never going to be great on day one. There are lots of things you're going to discover. And I think you need to build a culture of continuous improvement.
Yes.
Looking at those operational metrics, setting more and more higher and higher targets to become excellent in every domain.
Was there like an area that, from an operational perspective, you felt like, either warranted more of your focus and time, one discipline of IT or of security, or something that you enjoyed working on more, or spending time building up?
That's a twofold answer for me. So I spent a lot of time on operational metrics
Yeah.
and visibility. Okay, so one of the challenges in our field in security is we have so many tools. We have our endpoint management tool that tells you, hey, we have malware, anti-malware running on every machine. But there were 3 machines that, that are in the environment that don't have it. How do you get that visibility? And then you might have an HR system that tells you, these 4 people have left the firm, and then you look in your environment, you still see 4 people in the XYZ system because it wasn't decommissioned, they weren't deprovisioned correctly or something like that. So the challenge around having one pane of glass to find anomalies is very, very difficult, especially with the proliferation of tools, which you need. There is no one Cisco or one product out there that does everything well. So you end up having many, many products, and keeping them in sync is very hard. From the simplest things of vulnerability management to patch management. You might be patching all your boxes, and your SCCM might tell you, or your satellite console might tell you you're patching 100% of the boxes, but satellite forgot to scan your build network, and now your build network has machines that are 50 days old. So how do you bring all of that together? And there is no custom tool that I know of, so we end up having to build tools, but that helped me sleep at night.
Yeah, I can
Having
imagine
that visibility.
there, certainly something we hear from our customers often is, that with all those tools that you have, and thusly, with all the data each of those tools produce, you stack all that up in front of a security practitioner, especially when all of those tools are saying, hey, this is something very important that you need to pay attention to or give focus to. Often it can feel overwhelming to decide, what target am I going to shoot at? How do I determine if I need to spend, my cycles or, my resources hours on addressing vulnerabilities or investigating this particular threat, or, fixing this tool that doesn't seem to be reporting properly or is not configured properly. And that's been a challenge for, a lot of our customers. There's so much to do, and so, often few resources to attack it with. And so, I feel like this has been the struggle for a lot of leaders. And it sounds like what you're saying is, there is a way to take a rational approach. And it starts with, once you have all this visibility that you've obtained and you're actually collecting this data into a useful place, you have to have decided ahead of time on, what metrics you feel are important, so that you can apply those to the data. And then that gives you your sort of marching orders for the day that you can then give out to your team. And that sort of cycle, right, that, hopefully well-oiled machine that you've built, is what allows you to sort of make that slow progress and get those wins. Have I summarized that effectively? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I like what you said, slow progress, because we all of us, want to get this project done, and we want it done quickly so we can work on the next one, or take a breather for that matter. But there's so much to get done, and things don't get done so quickly as you would like. So being patient and being thoughtful about how to prioritize is a big one. And on the security note, another big important metric for me is what percentage of my externally facing devices were fully patched or had the least critical vulnerabilities. That's another really important metric for us in security to focus on, because that's your biggest risk as well.
Yeah,
For sure. One other question that's a little bit lighter, in terms of what did you enjoy most, or what have you enjoyed the most over time, that you might not have expected that you would enjoy doing in your roles, or that you knew you'd wanted to do it and you were able to do it in your roles there?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think early on it was all about, early on in my career, and especially becoming a CTO and managing large teams. A lot of it was around execution. Like how do we get this project done, and this and that. And what I found over the last few years is it's been great to mentor and to help some of these young talent that we have to just think about things outside of their domain, like communication and being organized. And the one thing I didn't realize I enjoyed so much was having some of our junior engineers come up to me or come up to the other senior management and say, hey guys, I need a mentor, and would you be willing to mentor me? And the first time that happened, I was like, okay, it's another hour of my day on a Friday.
Yes.
But then I realized I loved it, and it was so fulfilling. And I've started to do it with a couple of nonprofits these last few months, and it's really, really great for me personally, and I think for all of us to give back. And I didn't realize how fulfilling it has been.
So did that develop into a formal program? Was there a formal mentorship program there for you to take part in, or was it just a casual, people had to sort of have the courage to come up and talk to you?
It wasn't formal in my domain, but I loved it, and I encouraged my leads and everyone in the organization to come and talk to me and ask. I think, personally, I think it's better for people to take it upon themselves to ask. It shows me that they're motivated.
Good point.
And it takes courage. I remember as a junior engineer myself, it took a lot of courage to talk to the higher ups. And so it's a good start, and it's good training I think in all aspects.
Man, that has been certainly in my own career. I can say that mentorship I've received from folks that were a ways ahead of me down the road, that's been so valuable. It's been, and honestly, I look around me at my peers and folks that do what I do, at other organizations or even inside CBTS here, and the ones that I feel like have had the most success and that feel the most confident taking on new projects or things that they might not otherwise feel confident in doing, stuff that's outside of their normal track or comfort zone. Those are the ones that have had clear leadership, right? Somebody outside of maybe outside of their team, or like you said, senior management, that does more than just sign their paycheck or whatever. Those are the folks that are taking an interest and being willing to sacrifice even just a little bit of their time, like you said, maybe an hour a week, to talk to those folks, to allow them to hit them with questions that they might not be able to have somebody else anywhere that they could ask. And yeah, I've seen the positive side effects, certainly again in my own career, but also in my peers around here. And yeah, that's a great practice. I'd love to encourage that more to the folks that are listening, man. That you know more than you think you do, and there's always somebody around that could stand to benefit from your experience.
And also, don't be afraid to ask.
Right.
And you're not just asking for a favor. You're actually helping us get better, also, because the more we explain or articulate our lessons that we've learned through our careers, it's fulfilling for us as well. So, yeah, just remember that it's a two-way street.
Definitely. I was going to follow up that point and say, how much of the mentoring do you feel you get out of, you put in 50%, you get 50% back, or is it, you get more back than what you've invested?
I think it's helped me become a better communicator, because usually for my mentees, I've tried to prepare before they come to see me, before our appointment time. So I prepare what I'm going to say, and it makes me think through, like, how am I going to articulate this? So it's helped me in my communication to become clearer. And so I see it, equally positive for me as it is, as I hope it is for them.
Good deal. I think we might have a question here. So the one question that has come up more than once on these three talks so far is zero trust. So in the context of zero trust, what have you found to be either a strategy that you found useful, or is it a buzzword? Do you feel like it's more than a buzzword? It is a skew. It's not a skew. Where do you fall on that?
It's definitely not a skew. And John, in fact, I was at your last inside the CISO's office. I was asking these questions. I was on the other side of it.
Yeah.
It's not a skew in my experience. It's a whole mindset, and it revolves fundamentally around access. And access is hard. Access is
controlling
very hard.
access.
Controlling access, exactly. So controlling access. So first, find out who's coming in the organization, who's leaving. And leaving is a big one, right?
Yes.
It's like,
yes.
And doing it in a timely way, decommissioning access. And then the roles, the RBAC, right?
Yeah.
Role-based access controls. It's like, is Sandy in XYZ department? If he's in this department, what documents or what platforms does he have access to? Is Sandy an admin? If he's an admin, well, you better put special controls around that. So those would be the first place to start. And then it's all around automation, right? If the more and more of your applications that you can put under SSO, the less operational potential for errors, right? When you disable that guy or that person in AD, you know that 15 other applications have been turned off. So for me, it's MFA, it's access controls, and it's SSO. Drive everything towards SSO.
Agreed. I have found that the single sign-on is more of a blessing than anything in terms of your control, because you want to make sure you know who's coming in to your organization. You can get to the point of asking the question, if you're a little bit more mature, how are you interrogating the device that they're coming to your single sign-on? That obviously extends the interrogation, if you will, to the device that they're coming to. But yeah, putting things, as many as you can, behind an SSO is important.
There's, it's interesting. We've been talking to some customers in the last couple of weeks about domain consolidation efforts. Many of the, again, Sandy, you spent tons of time in financial, right? You said, you're kind of collecting different companies and merging them together. And so you've got these sort of disparate networks, disparate authentication systems, and, user databases that you're trying to sort of munge together into a single entity. And then, you're trying to perform, role-based access control for that group of users when, oftentimes they're collections of domains that are strung together with trust. It's like, I feel like that effort could, deserve a lot more attention maybe than it gets, to say, hey, we need to start consolidating, shrinking and collapsing our, disparate authentication systems down into, something smaller and more manageable and less complex, so that we can, apply a better, sort of more rigorous standard to, and be consistent as we apply policies across these groups. It seems to be, there's interest in that, in overcoming that challenge, but it's got to be hard. I imagine it was hard for you and your teams over the years.
Yes, and you said it like so clearly. Complexity is the enemy of security.
Right.
You just want to make things simple, and it's not that hard. You just need a commitment. So through all these mergers and all these acquisitions, the first thing everyone wants to do is, let's just set up an AD trust. And that's
all.
a formula for disaster.
It'll never last, right? It'll just be a temporary thing, I'm sure.
Exactly. So you have to put that upfront effort, and part of that is just winning the mindset of the people involved and being convincing and explaining the pros and cons. It's not easy. People are afraid. They're afraid to break things, right?
Oh, yeah.
I'm responsible for X. If I set up a trust and I open this, I know everything will work. But if we do it your way, we might break things. And so there's a balance there, and it takes time and lots of testing. But I love what you just said, Justin. Get rid of the complexity, make it simple.
Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, on the topic of mergers and acquisitions, I don't have any firsthand experience with it, and I'm hoping I know the answer to the question. And the question is, how early was IT brought into the merger and acquisition process? Was it towards the beginning, or was it bolted on later at the end?
It depends,
Okay.
at times for various reasons, like regulatory, hey, we can't announce it to the world kind of thing. We couldn't bring IT early. And there have been times when we were part of the due diligence even before.
That's what I'm thinking. Yeah.
So it depended on the scenario. So I've experienced both.
I don't think I'll have to ask you the question which you preferred. So we'll just leave that question to the
Can't
side.
trust those IT guys
Exactly.
to know ahead of time. I think we're closing in on the end of the session. Any questions coming in from the audience there, Lance?
Well, I have one here that how do you get non-technical business leadership to care about security?
Yeah, I feel like it has been a challenge to, get, people that have a billion other concerns that are not your technology or your security initiatives that you're trying to get, completed. As you said, execution's high on your priority list, but for other folks, they've got 200 other priorities. So how do you get their attention, Sandy?
So for me, again, some of this I learned the hard way, but it's all about relationships. You build relationships with the senior management and you tell them stories. I think over the years when I've succeeded, it's been about stories. It's like, hey, a friend of mine works at XYZ. They did this new anti-ransomware solution and they were hit with this and this. Those stories resonate. So I would try and build relationships and through stories. Stories is a great way of motivating your team. It's a great way to get people to buy into the vision. So I think that's been a part of my playbook is telling stories, because when you're working with these high intensity folks who are really focused and they're under a lot of pressure to make money or to do X, Y, and Z, it's hard for them to sit there and say, hey, you know what? I really want to understand what zero trust is. They don't.
No,
they
they
just
don't.
want you to solve that problem. They want to make sure they're paying you to take care of things, but you need them and you need them to understand. So how do you do that? So I think the best way I've succeeded is through stories and to minimize the daily operational impact. If you tell your CEO every time he has to send an email, he has to tag the email first, it's not going to work, right? Yeah. So you think of solutions that will minimize the negative impact on their day-to-day.
That's interesting that you say it's stories. It's, sorry, Lance, if we got another question, we can take it. The part about telling stories, I've heard that from others that, and I would imagine a number of people don't think about telling stories as a way to communicate a particular business need, but that does tend to be the way that's successful. Certainly, it sounds like in your case.
Yeah, the hard part, it's not easy to tell stories and make them funny and exciting. You really have to practice up front. So sometimes when I wanted to give a challenge to the team and get them to think about, operational efficiency or velocity, you want to send a message. You want to say, hey guys, we're not doing a great job these last few weeks. We need to get better. But how do you color that with a story? And there are always stories that even started the thought process in your mind, right?
Yeah.
So in my case, often the stories would be, trader X lost his XYZ terminal and he couldn't trade that day and he lost $2 million or something like that. So that would be a story that I would practice in my head, and I'd say, okay, how do I put that into the message? And how do we as an IT team look in terms of this story? And I think the one thing that's really, really important, and this is sometimes a challenge for us in security and also in technology, is security and technology, we're bedmates, right? And so is the help desk. These three groups, we're totally dependent on each other. We're the service desk, security, and the rest of IT, and this idea, and also the developers. We're all in the same bed. When people are failing, I mean, when our users are unhappy with something, they don't say, hey, the help desk guy sucks, or he doesn't say, hey, this developer is awful. They say IT,
right, writ large.
Your IT department is horrible. So I think that culture, that it behooves us all to think of ourselves as a team.
Yeah. And building I'm going to go back to what you said about building relationships. I feel like we talk about building relationships up, but certainly sideways and down. I mean, if I could, I'm going to make a bumper sticker that I'm going to put on my car that says, love your help desk. I feel like the folks that have fostered the best, most, compassionate relationships with their desktop support and help desk teams have had some of the best success as security leaders. The folks that are, hey, we rely on these people, not just to go and apply fixes, during an incident, but just day to day, taking care of users, resetting passwords when it needs to happen, helping with installation of patches. Like, these are the grunts that make your program successful. And so, by telling stories to those folks about success and the importance of diligence in protecting, the user workstation or the server, but also to talk about hey, how are you doing? What tools do you need to do your job better? As a CTO, I feel like, you're having those conversations with those folks and showing them that you care and that their job is important. It's critical to the business. I love that idea.
Definitely.
And setting high standards, that's the other key
Mm.
piece. It's our job as leaders to set high standards. So when someone is not executing to the high standard, how do you get them to get better? Are you providing coaching? Are you providing training? So that's our job.
That's great.
Yeah.
Lance, maybe time for one more question. We have anything else come in?
No, I think we're good on time. And on questions. Unfortunately, I got a story for you guys. Sandy on episode 2 was commenting during the session, and then we invited him to come in here and speak and be a part of this. So I feel like we're getting very little comments out there by the folks that are watching today, because they don't want to be invited to be on the show next month.
You're up. Yeah. You post something, you're instantly
So Sandy, that's your fault?
No. We promise. You can ask a question, and we're not going to necessarily invite you to be on the show.
I'm going to leave, and you're taking this chair. That's what's happening if you send a comment, and just FYI.
But guys, again, thank you so much for today. Sandy, thank you for your time.
Definitely.
As always, thank you everyone for watching. And until next time, thanks for joining CBTS Tech Talk.
Good deal.
Take care.
Take care, folks.
Good to see you, Sandy.